I stepped away from my desk for 5 minutes, just long enough to grab coffee, just long enough to breathe. When I came back, my name was gone. The contract was still open on my screen, exactly where I'd left it. Same clauses, same approvals, same number that had swallowed the better part of my year, $510 million. But the signature block at the bottom had changed. The line that carried my name, the one that meant accountability, was empty, cleanly removed. No strike-through, no comment, as if it had never existed. I refreshed the page. Nothing. I checked the version history. A silent update. Approved. Relax, Corey Fisk said, stopping beside my desk. Our CEO didn't look at me when he spoke. He looked at the screen. I took your name off. The deal doesn't need a babysitter, for a moment. I didn't respond. Could you please pause for a moment? The story you are about to hear contains some fictional elements and is supported by AI technology to enhance emotional depth and educational value. The content is intended for educational and reflective purposes. If you find it inappropriate, please take some time to rest and take care of yourself. Thank you for visiting. I'd spent years being the person who slowed things down. That was the job. I handled reputational exposure and ethical risk, the part of the deal no one liked to acknowledge once the numbers started to shine. My signature wasn't decorative. It meant I had personally reviewed the people behind the money, the promises behind the projections. Partners trusted it because they trusted me. Corey never did. He believed speed solved everything. Growth washed away mistakes. Anyone who asked hard questions was friction. He called it efficiency. I called it denial. You're still involved, he added, already stepping back. Already done. Just not in a way that scares people around us. The office buzzed on. Meetings resumed. Someone laughed too loudly near the elevators. No alarms, no announcements. The foundation hadn't cracked. It had been quietly lifted while everyone was distracted. I stared at the contract again. Legally. It was flawless. Every requirement met. Every approval intact. What it no longer had was a human being willing to stand behind it when trust was tested. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for my name back. I let the shock compress into something tighter, colder, because the deal was still valid. Only the responsibility wasn't. There's a moment when you stop arguing and start noticing you're no longer respected. If that moment sounds familiar, welcome. Hit subscribe. The truth may arrive late, but it never misses the address. I learned what Corey Fisk really thought of me. She's become a bottleneck, he said, casually, as if describing traffic. We move faster without extra signatures. No one looked at me. That was the point. I sat there, jaw tight, listening as my role was reduced to friction. For years, I had been the person called when deals went quiet, when partners hesitated, when confidence started to crack. I had stepped in 3 times before, when contracts were hours from collapse, reworking terms, rebuilding trust, keeping 9 figures from evaporating. Those rescues never made slides. They made survival when things went wrong. Partners didn't call Corey. They called me, late nights, early mornings, one voice asking another. Can we still trust this? I always answered yes, because I had done the work to make it true. Corey waved that history away with a smile. To him, a signature was a checkbox. Trust was interchangeable. People were replaceable components in a system designed for speed. He spoke about efficiency while dismantling the very safeguards that made growth possible. We just need you to support quietly, he said, finally meeting my eyes. No need to slow the room. Support quietly. Don't question, don't anchor, just assist. I nodded, because arguing would have been theater, and Corey loved theater when it wasn't aimed at him. Inside, the resentment settled heavier, sharper, not anger yet, something colder, something patient. I opened the internal risk registry, one by one. I removed my name from every personal assessment tied to the deal. No announcements, no confrontation, just clean updates. Fully compliant, entirely unremarkable, by the time anyone noticed. I was no longer the bottleneck there. Morning came without drama, which should have warned me something was wrong. The email arrived before my coffee cooled. One subject line: carefully neutral routine integrity review. It came from our largest partner, the one that rarely asked questions because it trusted the answers. I read it twice, not for meaning, but for tone. There was no accusation, no urgency, just procedure. I forwarded it to Corey Fisk. He didn't even pause. They do that all the time, he said with a thin smile. Nothing illegal, nothing to worry about. He was technically correct, which was his favorite kind of correct. This wasn't an audit. Audits hunt errors. This was something quieter. An integrity review examined people, not paperwork. It asked who stood behind a deal when conditions changed, when numbers slipped, when excuses ran out. Corey didn't hear that part. He heard clearance. I said nothing. I didn't explain. I didn't clarify the difference between compliance and trust. I had done that too many times already, and each time it had sounded like resistance to him. Silence, I'd learned, was the only response he didn't immediately dismiss. I spent the morning watching calendars fill and meetings proceed as if nothing had shifted. The contract remained active. The headlines stayed optimistic. Internally, the system still treated the deal as secure. On the surface, Corey was right. Everything was fine by early afternoon. The update arrived. The partner had temporarily suspended a tranche of funding pending completion of the review. $88 million. Not withdrawn. Not canceled. Just unavailable. Frozen in place, like a held breath. Corey stared at the number as if it might blink first. That's not a loss, he said. No? I agreed. Finally speaking. It's not. I kept my voice flat. Factual. Because this wasn't punishment. It was evaluation. A pause created by the absence of someone willing to say, I stand behind this. And for the first time, I could see Corey realizing that legality had never been the standard. That realization arrived quietly, and it did not leave him the way confidence usually does afterward. The question arrived without warning, dropped into the room like a weight no one had prepared to lift. Who is the person standing behind this agreement? The partner's voice came through the speakerphone. Calm and precise. No accusation, no raised tone, just curiosity sharpened by caution. Around the table, chairs shifted, pens stopped moving. I watched Corey Fisk lean back, fingers steepled, buying himself a second to choose language instead of truth. He answered with paragraphs: legal frameworks, governance structures, collective accountability. He spoke beautifully while saying nothing at all. The words flowed, polished and empty, designed to reassure without committing anyone to risk. That was when I felt the tension change. Board members exchanged glances they hadn't bothered to hide before. Confidence gave way to calculation, for the first time. The room understood that the question wasn't about paperwork, it was about a person. The call ended without resolution. 5 minutes later, my phone vibrated. I was asked to join a quick consultation. No apology, no acknowledgement, just urgency. As I walked back into the room, every eye turned toward me, not with respect, with expectation. They wanted a solution without admitting they'd removed the one thing that made solutions possible. Corey spoke carefully. We just need your perspective, he said, informally. I took my seat and looked around the table I had anchored for years. This is usually where I'd ask a hard question or offer a steadier answer. Instead, I paused. If you're listening to this, you might be wondering what you would do next. Would you step in anyway? Would you protect a system that already decided you were optional? I chose clarity. I don't represent trust anymore, I said. Evenly. Only compliance. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Confusion rippled outward. Corey frowned. The board fell silent. In that moment, uncertainty replaced control. That absence would soon ask questions no contract language, however clever, could confidently answer for anyone left in charge. Because they finally understood something essential. The agreement still existed, but the person who once stood behind it no longer did. Silence became policy the moment Corey decided to sign where my name used to be. The confirmation request went out that afternoon, routed through legal, framed as routine. Corey didn't announce it. He didn't ask permission. He simply added his signature to the risk acknowledgement, confident that authority could substitute for history. This clears it. He told the room, "We move forward." We didn't. The response came back within the hour. Polite, automated, final. The partner system flagged the signature as unverified for reputational continuity. No escalation, no argument, just a refusal to accept a name without a trust record attached. Corey frowned at the screen. That makes no sense. It made perfect sense. Their system wasn't judging legality. It was measuring credibility. Years of consistent accountability couldn't be recreated by a title typed into a box. Another hour passed, then another. Each delay froze additional funds mid-transfer. 7 figures stalled, then 8. I watched the numbers stack quietly while the room filled with movement and noise. "Why isn't this clearing?" someone asked. "Because the signature doesn't match the trust profile," legal answered. Carefully, Corey turned toward me. "You can fix this," he said, not asking. I met his eyes and stayed silent, not out of spite. Out of precision. I had already been removed from responsibility. Stepping in now would only pretend that decision hadn't been real. By evening, finance logged the impact. $88 million marked as temporarily unavailable. Not lost. Not clawed back. Just inaccessible. Sitting behind a process that no longer recognized who stood behind it. Corey paced. Phones rang. Advisors whispered. No one had broken a rule. No policy had been violated. Every action was defensible on paper. That was the worst part. The damage hadn't come from misconduct. It came from absence, from the quiet gap left when accountability was stripped out and replaced with confidence. When the report went final, the loss was recorded cleanly. No blame assigned, no signatures questioned, just a number, and the understanding that silence, when chosen deliberately, could cost more than any mistake ever would. Everyone felt it. I didn't expect the call to come that night. But it did. Corey asked me to step into his office alone. No assistants, no legal, just the two of us and the soft hum of a building that refused to sleep. He didn't sit. He stood, arms crossed, already convinced of his own conclusion. "You're doing this on purpose," he said. "You know you can fix it." The accusation landed harder than anger, for a moment. I felt the old reflex pull at me, the instinct to stabilize, to absorb damage that wasn't mine. That instinct had built my career. It was also the reason I was standing there. I took a breath. "No," I said. "I'm not doing anything. That's the point." He stared, waiting for a concession that never came. I was removed from responsibility. I continued. Evenly. I accepted that. What's happening now is simply the system responding to that decision. The next morning, the board fractured. Some wanted me reinstated quietly, as if trust could be patched back in overnight. Others questioned why Corey had removed the only person partners consistently relied on. The room filled with careful language and poorly hidden doubt. For the first time, Corey was defending himself instead of the numbers. I watched without intervening. It was uncomfortable. It was also necessary. By afternoon, the partner followed up, not with threats, with structure. They requested a comprehensive review of leadership oversight tied to the deal. Not the contract, not compliance, leadership. That word shifted everything. The evaluation wouldn't be fast. It wouldn't be loud, but it would be thorough. And it would ask questions no one could redirect with charm. I felt the conflict finally settle. The pull to rescue faded, replaced by something firmer. I wasn't walking away. I was standing still. And for the first time. That was enough. There. Reputation doesn't collapse with noise. It erodes quietly. The review expanded faster than anyone expected. What began as a single integrity check spread outward, touching other contracts, other partners, other assurances Corey had once called solid. Nothing was frozen this time. Nothing dramatic happened. Files were opened. Questions were logged. Calendars filled with cautious meetings. No one sued us. No regulator knocked on the door. Every clause still held. Every process remained technically compliant. That was the strange part. The company was doing nothing wrong, yet trust was slipping through its fingers, internally. The mood changed. Sales spoke more carefully. Legal stopped smiling. Even finance began adding qualifiers to projections. I watched it happen with a calm I hadn't expected. Not joy, not revenge, just clarity. If you've ever been told reputation is intangible, this is the moment I'd ask you to think again. Ask yourself how many deals survive once confidence wavers, even without a single broken rule. I'm curious where you land on that. The downgrade arrived without ceremony. Not a headline, just a notation in partner systems that adjusted our risk tier. That single adjustment slowed conversations, lengthened approvals, and quietly cost opportunities no one could trace back to one decision. Corey tried to outrun it. He spoke louder, promised more, explained harder. But explanations don't transfer credibility. They only highlight its absence. By the end of the week, the board had no choice. An independent panel was convened to review leadership judgment related to the deal. Corey was instructed to prepare a full account of his decisions. He didn't look at me when the notice went out. I didn't need him to. The satisfaction wasn't sharp. It was cold, steady, and unmistakably earned. It felt like watching gravity work. Slow and inevitable, pulling authority downward while everyone pretended nothing was happening in plain sight at last. The hearing was supposed to be procedural, but procedure has a way of exposing intent. By the time the independent panel convened, the board already knew more than it wanted to admit. Version histories had been pulled, access logs compared. What looked like efficiency on the surface resolved into a single, deliberate act. Corey Fisk had personally authorized the removal of my signature from the contract. Bypassing internal safeguards meant to preserve ethical accountability. The room went quiet when that conclusion was stated aloud. No one argued. There was nothing to argue. Corey didn't deny it either. He framed it as leadership, as decisiveness, as cutting weight before a race. But the metaphor collapsed under scrutiny. Because what he had cut wasn't delay. It was the only break the system had. That was when the power shifted. The question stopped circling me and settled on him. Why remove the last ethical sign-off? Why assume trust would persist without its steward? Why treat reputation as a transferable asset instead of a personal one? Each answer Corey offered sounded smaller than the last. Eventually, someone turned toward me. "Would you be willing to sign again?" the chair asked. Not formally, almost cautiously, as if the room were testing whether authority still flowed in the direction it once had. I felt every eye return to me. This time, without expectation. Without entitlement, just uncertainty. I didn't rush. Silence had already proven its value. Signing again would restore balance instantly, but it would also erase the lesson that had finally surfaced. That responsibility could not be removed without consequence. That power, once misused, did not reset on command. So I stayed still. No refusal, no acceptance, just absence. The pause unsettled them more than any answer could have. In that moment, they understood what Corey never had. I wasn't withholding power. I was letting them feel what happens when it's gone. And that absence quietly reversed every hierarchy he thought he controlled, forever completely. Consequences never arrive the way people imagine. Corey's departure was announced in a single email, carefully worded and emotionally empty. Effective immediately. Leadership would transition, no scandal, no apology, just a quiet acknowledgement that confidence in his judgment had expired. I read it once, then closed my laptop and sat still. That was how power ended here. The fallout continued anyway. 2 partners paused negotiations within days, citing internal reassessments, Another withdrew completely, unwilling to wait for stability that might not return. Nothing dramatic happened on paper, no lawsuits, no emergency meetings broadcast across floors, just contracts dissolving through polite silence. Inside the company, people spoke in lowered voices. Some looked relieved, others looked betrayed, unsure who to blame now that the story had lost its villain. I felt none of that. Justice, I learned, rarely feels triumphant. It feels precise. The call from our former partner came the following week. The same calm voice, the same measured tone. They didn't ask me to fix anything. They offered me independence, an advisory role, clear boundaries, personal accountability restored. This time without interference. I accepted without negotiation. Trust, when earned, doesn't need to be chased. On my last walk through the office, no one stopped me. They didn't need to. The lesson was already circulating. Later, I heard Corey had asked about me, whether I planned this, whether I had pushed for his removal. Someone answered honestly, I hadn't done anything at all. That was when it finally reached him. He hadn't removed an obstacle. He hadn't streamlined a process. He had dismissed the one thing that kept belief intact. He didn't fire me. He fired trust, and everything else followed. It happened quietly, without celebration, without speeches, without victory. Just consequences aligning with choices, systems correcting themselves, and a company learning too late that removing ethics is not optimization. It is erosion. That lesson cost more than anyone expected eventually. I signed the new contract in a quiet conference room with no audience and no urgency. My name sat alone on the page, unshared, unprotected by committees or diluted by consensus. For the first time in years, the responsibility matched the authority, and that felt like relief rather than risk. The partner didn't congratulate me. They didn't need to. We spoke about boundaries, expectations, and what accountability would look like when conditions changed. It was calm, clear, professional. I signed once, deliberately, and slid the document back across the table. That was it. There was no victory lap, no announcement, no urge to look backward. Revenge requires attention. I didn't have any left to give. What I felt instead was space, the kind that appears when you're no longer carrying weight that was never supposed to be yours alone. I heard later that my former company was still operating, smaller, more careful, processes rewritten, approvals layered. No one touched a signature without discussion anymore, not because of policy, but because memory had replaced arrogance. Sometimes people ask if I regret staying silent. I don't. Silence taught them what arguments never could, and it forced systems to reveal their true priorities without interference. Time passed, and with it came a quiet confidence that nothing essential had been lost, only illusions. As I left the building for the last time, contract secured and future intact, one thought stayed with me. Dry and unavoidable, turns out, signatures don't mean anything until they do. When everything finally went quiet, I realized the lesson hadn't been about contracts, money, or even power. It was about responsibility. Real responsibility doesn't shout, it doesn't threaten, it doesn't rush, it waits, and it holds its ground until the system either respects it or breaks itself trying to ignore it. I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I stopped carrying what was never meant to be invisible. What stayed with me most wasn't the loss they suffered, but the moment I chose not to step in and save them anymore. That choice hurt. It felt wrong at first, but it was also the first time I respected myself enough to let consequences do their work. There's a strange calm that comes when you stop proving your value to people who already decided not to see it. If you're still here listening, I'm curious, did this moment resonate with you? Have you ever been in a place where staying silent was harder, but more honest, than speaking up and tell me, where are you listening from right now? If this story made you feel seen, or reminded you of something you've lived through, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. A like or a share helps these stories reach people who might need them. And if you want to stay with me for the next one, consider subscribing. Some lessons are quieter, but they're worth staying until the end.